G'day and welcome to another video with Better Pics. Hope this finds everyone well. Just doing a very quick video on stitching panoramas within Adobe Camera Raw. Of course, you can stitch within Camera Raw now. I'm using the most recent update, version 12.3, which I think was made available a few days ago. You probably or hopefully would have seen the video that I've created recently around the changes with Adobe Camera Raw. So some fantastic changes there that I think will probably help in terms of workflow speed and efficiency. Anyway, check it out and let me know what you think. So what I'm going to do, because this image is a landscape image and it's going to be stitched into a horizontal panorama, I might actually pop those thumbnails down the bottom. So if you just right click on that bottom tab just there where the mouse is at the moment and click horizontal, you see that those images pop up at the bottom. So it's just a little bit more of an efficient use of desktop space for a horizontal landscape images. So holding down my shift key, I'll just click on the last image there so that all those images are selected. Hovering over any one of those images, right click and merge to panorama. The shortcut is Control M, as you can see there. So let's just pop that. So that's happened really quickly, a little bit quicker than I expected. So you can see up here, it's just identifying at the top line there, merge images to panorama. So I might just click and drag that to be a little bit bigger, just so we can see that stitch a little bit clearer. All 6 images successfully merged. So projection is the method in which the images are stitched together. And there's 3 options there: spherical, cylindrical and perspective. Now, when I used to stitch images together in Photoshop and then Lightroom, I would often use cylindrical. And I just found for the process that I would shoot in that it gave me the most successful outcomes. Now, the vast majority of time with panoramas, I'm shooting them handheld, and that often works because I'm shooting vast landscapes and big spaces, and there's less potential for issues with that parallax effect. So the relative relationship from elements in the photograph in the foreground versus the background. Now, if I was doing really critical work like interiors or architectural work where I'm stitching a large number of images, I would more than likely go with a panoramic specific head so that I'm able to really make sure that the camera is rotating around what's called the nodal point, which is the central point of the lens, where there's no effect on the elements from the foreground to the background. And it means that the stitching process happens a lot better and it's a lot more consistent, and you're less likely to run into any stitching issues. Obviously with an image like this, all the elements in the frame are a long way away. So generally speaking, handheld, I find it works really well. Now, they're not always the most perfect stitch. As you can see here, there's some extra space around the image that isn't working, that hasn't worked perfectly. The images have had to be distorted a little bit so that they have a clean stitch and there's clean joins, but generally speaking, I don't have too many issues. Let's just check out spherical. You see there's not a great deal of difference. The image is squashed a little bit vertically, and perspective is vastly different. So you can see that it's really attempting to change the way in which the images, each of the images are stitched together and how they're represented. So I'm going to go with cylindrical. As I mentioned, that's normally the process that I use, and it's it gives me a result that I'm happy with. Now, just down below that, there's a couple of options. There's boundary wrap and fill edges. And just a little note there, projection options are not editable after the merge is complete. So you want to make a decision about how you want to go here before you actually complete the merge. So I'm just going to experiment with these so you can see exactly what they do. So if we just click and drag on that boundary wrap, you can see that what it's doing is actually warping the images to fill that space. Now, if we go all the way to 100, you can see that it's filled all of those spaces around the image really efficiently. And that's great. I mean, in this particular example, it hasn't required a lot of warping to be able to do that. If you, for example, photograph with a really wide angle lens, then you might find that warping needs to be more significant. So it's up to you on how you do that. But just keep in mind that the more warping that happens, the more detrimental it can be to your image files. And what I find is that the more warping that happens, the image tends to lose a little bit of sharpness. Now, I wouldn't say that there's a definitive scale of what amount of sharpness you lose depending on the amount of warping, but the more warping that you do, the more likely that you're going to lose that sharpness. So it's just a consideration to take into account. So for this particular image, because it was shot on a longer lens, there's not a huge amount of warping, so I'm just going to increase that a little bit. I'm not going to go up to 100%, I'm just going to go to 50%, just so that there's a little bit of warping there, but it's not a huge push on the image files. Now, if we look at fill edges, what that actually does is it uses like a content aware fill to fill in the extra space. Now again, I would say your approach on this is best taken individually and specifically to each image. Sometimes it'll work really well, sometimes it won't. For example, with a big sky, there's not any level of complexity of what it is that the image is duplicating or filling in with those extra pixels that weren't there in the beginning. But it's just worth considering and looking really critically with each image after you fill in those edges. So I'm going to click it on this time because I would like to look at the image fairly closely in Photoshop afterwards, just to see, or in Adobe Camera Raw afterwards I should say, just to see exactly how well it it goes. Alright, let's hit merge and see what it asks for. Now it's actually asking for us to save the image in a location, and it's gone to the location where the raw files are actually located. You can see that you have the options there, or the drop down box for digital negative. It's the only option, and it's just applied pano to the end of the file name, which is the file name of one of the images that's actually in it's gone into making that panorama. And alright, so we're going to hit save, and you can see it's really quickly created an extra panorama or an extra file that's the stitched version of those images. Now you can see if we look at the source files, it's actually applied some settings, which is what those settings were when I checked and unchecked the auto apply of settings. Now it's up to you on how you want to do this, but my recommendation is to always consider editing the digital negative or final result specifically once you've actually stitched it together. You still have all the flexibility of working with a digital negative, and it just means that you're approaching your edits as I normally recommend, which is specific to each image. So the beauty of having a stitched image that is saved as a digital negative is you have all of that flexibility that you would normally have in a digital negative or raw workflow. So definitely worth considering. And yeah, I mean the result that we've got with that auto box checked is pretty good. I mean it's a good start, but I certainly would normally save that digital negative without any adjustments made, and then make those adjustments in Adobe Camera Raw as part of my normal editing process. Okay, so you can see that as I mentioned, it's created that file. I'm just going to hit done. And if we go back to Bridge, we can see we actually have that stitched panorama. Now the way that it actually looks is, looks like in the thumbnail that it doesn't actually have any adjustments made. We're just going to open it back up in Adobe Camera Raw, and you can see it's actually gone back to the original. So full flexibility for editing there. So from here I would go ahead and make the normal edits that I would make for that file, but certainly with the panorama you can see if I just click on that, it goes into 100%, and we've got some spectacular detail in this image. It really does. The high resolution images that you achieve out of a stitched image really are quite amazing. So as you can see, the detail in the rocks there is absolutely beautiful, and the capacity for this image to be printed really large, which panoramas look amazing. So the potential for this image to be printed really large, and still retaining that beautiful detail and that clarity is really well maintained with such a massive image. So you can see down the bottom here, it is now 16,145 pixels by 3,919, which is approximately just over 63 megapixels, so massive file there. And obviously, as I mentioned, it's going to give you some incredible clarity. Alrighty, so that is the process of stitching a panorama in the new version of Adobe Camera Raw 12.3, just released recently in the last few days. Hope this video has been helpful and you've learnt a few things, picked up a few pointers. As always, if you would have any questions, please don't hesitate to leave them in the comments below. Otherwise, look forward to hearing from you and look forward to seeing you again in the future. Take care.